Hi, and welcome to my session about how to not write custom style as CSS or SASS in your SharePoint framework project. Thank you for the sponsor of the conference, of course, and few information about me. I'm Fabio Franzini. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Business Application and Office Development category. I'm a senior consultant and MCT trainer. So if you need to contact me, please use my email or the web address or Twitter and LinkedIn profile. So, the agenda. We have some topics to cover in this session. First of all, we need to cover the importance of the consistency of the UI design, how to use the Fluent UI control in SharePoint framework, how to use the context provider themes in SharePoint framework, and how to use the CSS framework or the utility frameworks like the Tailwind CSS in your project. You need to remember the importance of the consistency of the UI design. Consistency of a graphic design element of your app will mean the unification of design, color, shapes, and behavior that this element assumes with our ecosystem and in relation to the other elements. There are various types of consistency. The graphic aspect, the visual consistency, like the element behavior, and the functionality, so the functional consistency. Unify this element leads the user to use one of these systems without distinction, without feeling lost. So this is very, very important. Please don't reinvent the wheel. Why? Because it's very difficult in terms of time and work to implement a custom UI and maintain a custom UI. And then remember again the importance of the consistency inside the UI. Create custom style, need to spend time on think about the styles, on implement the styles. So we already have styles that we can use inside your project. What is the Fluent UI React control? Fluent UI React is an open source React front-end framework designed by Microsoft and implemented by Microsoft. And this library it's already used by Microsoft inside a lot of Microsoft services like SharePoint, like Outlook, and again another more than these two services. It provides a robust, up-to-date, accessible component that are highly customizable by using a CSS in JS framework. Later in this session, I'll explain more deeply what is a CSS in JS framework and how to use. There are two versions of this library. The first one is the Fluent UI React, and it's used in almost all the Office products. Again, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office clients, and more. The second one is the Fluent UI React Northstar. And this library is used only at this moment inside the Microsoft Teams client. So you are able to select one or of these two frameworks if you want to build a project for SharePoint or for Teams. Basically, if you need to create a project only for SharePoint and a web part for SharePoint, for example, my suggestion is to use the Fluent UI React. So it's already present inside the project when you start with the Yeoman, the scaffolding of the project. and you have only to use this library. Otherwise, if you want to create something that will be used only inside in Teams, a good choice is to switch to use the Fluent UI React North Star, because this library that you can see inside the second image, the big one, represents the same UI that the Teams have. Let me show you a simple demo. For this demo, I choose to navigate directly on the microsoft.com/design/fluent website. This website is the reference for all the Fluent design system. And of course, you are able to see that there are some information and there are some platforms available for this design system. We want to go to the web, of course, and then go to the list of the controls. Here you can navigate and then show all the controls that this library contains. For example, buttons, for example, the checkbox, the choice group, for example, more complex controls like the calendar, the date picker, or again the taste list control. This is control. It's have the same UI of the view inside on a SharePoint list, for example. And by using this React control, you are able to mimic the same UI that you have inside SharePoint. It's very simple to use. For example, if we go again to the button, we can click on show code. You see that we have to import the controls that we have to use, and then we can write the React markup to render these controls. Each controls have different properties. In this case, we have two controls, one for the default button and one for the primary button. The difference is only on the UI. This is the primary, this is use an accent color, and this is the standard button. It's the same for all the controls that you can find here inside this page. You remember that we have another library. This library is the Fluent UI React North Star. And this library contains different controls in terms of the UI and in terms of the behavior of the component. For example, we have the accordion that we don't have inside the Fluent UI React. The same, for example, for the carousel. This is the control that implement a carousel and a slideshow of image or another control. Or, for example, the avatar control that it's used inside Teams, the same UI, the breadcrumb, okay, this one. For example, again, the menu, this one, and the tree control, for example. Okay. I repeat, you can use the Fluent UI React inside the SharePoint customization or web part, and you can use this North Star implementation for the Teams customization or application. Another important thing is to manage the section background inside a SharePoint page. Basically, the user are able to edit the page and change for each section, change the background color. In terms of theme, there are a different set of colors when you change the section background color. And it's very important to manage inside your web part this behavior, because you need to manage for example, the color of the text, the color of the controls like the button, when you change the background of the section and the web part. So let me show you in a simple demo how to manage this behavior. So for this demo, I built a specific SharePoint framework project that implements some web parts. Just on a simple web part with the use of the background, on a web part that not use correctly the background, an implementation for an React control that use the background color, the section background, and the most important web part, it's this one that use that add the support for the Fluent UI React control to the theme variant, the different background color for a section. So let me show first the demo in the UI of the demo. So we are able to add some web part. And then the most important web part is this one. You are able to see in this web part that you have some Fluent UI control, like on a text, like on a primary button, on a default button, on a link, and a details on a details list control. If we change the section background, you are able to see that the correct color are changed. All the web parts, but not this one, change correctly the background, but the most important thing is this web part that change not only the background, but the color for each controls that have inside. For example, to maintain the primary button with an accent color, if we select the strong section background color, you're able to see that the background of this button it's completely changed from the default accent color to white. And this is the reason why, because this button have to maintain the primary role inside your UI. It's very important. So come back to the code, and I'll show you how to implement this behavior. So basically, you need to go to the manifest for each web part and add this property, supports theme variants. This is important because by default, when you create a new web part, this property is not present. And if you want to add the support for the web part, you need to put this property inside the manifest.json file for each web part. Now we can go to the class that implement the web part. For manage the theme variant, you need to import some objects, some classes from the Microsoft SP component base. You need to add the theme provider, the theme change event hearts, the iRead-only theme, and iSemantic color. Because you need to write this code, and then inside the onInit method of the web part, you need to access to the context to take the correct theme provider and then try to get the theme. In this way, we are able to have the current theme variant applied to a specific section. So on a section when our web part live inside the page. Another thing is if you want to manage the change of the theme, you are able to add the theme changed event. And in this case, we are able to set the current changed theme and then re-render the web part. This is not a React web part. It's just a web part that uses the string interpolation to create a paragraph with a specific text and a particular style that set the background color to the body background that comes from the semantic color. The semantic color is present inside the theme variant. For the most complex scenario, we can go to the Fluent UI section background example web part. The code is almost the same. The only change is inside the render, because inside the render we don't generate any HTML, but just the instance and then the render of a React component. This is the React component, and in this case the React component uses some Fluent UI components. You need only to add these components by the import statement, and you need to add another control, and this control is the theme provider. It's based from @fluentui/react theme provider package. This theme provider is very important because have a property theme, and if you set this property theme with the theme variant that comes from the web part, you are able to apply automatically for all the children, all the children control that this theme provider have, the same theme without to set any theme property inside the controls. It's very powerful. You need only to wrap all the controls with this theme provider. And the result is this one. Again, if you try to change the background color section, you're able to see that the colors completely change. Okay, now how to use a CSS in JS framework inside SharePoint framework. First of all, what is the CSS in JS? Basically, it's an implementation of a framework that's able to create the CSS by using JavaScript. There are two different kind of this CSS in JS framework. The framework that generates the CSS by using JavaScript at the build time, and the same but that generate the CSS at runtime. Microsoft have implemented a CSS in JS framework, and this framework is present inside the @fluentui/merge styles library. Provide a way, this framework, to generate and load style dynamically inside your JavaScript or TypeScript code. It's designed to make it simple to style component through JavaScript, and it's generate CSS class written then using inline style to ensure that we can use the CSS feature like pseudo selectors, like the over selector, and the parent-child selectors like the media query and another. The library is very light and speed, and there are no dependency. It's very interesting. Let me show again on a simple demo. To explain better the use of the CSS in JS framework, I create a simple web part. There are no Fluent UI controls, but only a simple implementation on how to use again the CSS in JS framework. Inside here we have inside the React control of the my web part, we have a div with a button that contains a description text. you are able to see that inside the render method, we have the class name equal to an object that named root, and the same for the button. We have a class name that have the name of the object button. These two objects are two variables that come from these get class names. This is a function imported from a different file. If we come to the hello world class names.ts, we are able to see the import of the merge style set that come from the Fluent UI merge styles library. This is the implementation by Microsoft of an CSS in JS. It's used internally by the Fluent UI React controls, but you can use to generate your code, of course. Okay, we have an export of an get class names function, and this function return a complex object that comes from this merge style set that take this object as an input. This object, it's just a JSON object that contains the name of the classes as the name of the property, like root and button. And inside this object, we have the property background set to read, and the same for the button background color to green. That's all. We can, of course, create something like this, but that accept some parameters, and then use this parameter inside the merge style set, in this case, to pass property and then generate dynamically the CSS class, and of course the implementation of this CSS class. Another thing to take present is that this merge style set generate the class name with this as a prefix, like root and button, and then this library add a suffix to this class name to avoid the possibility to have different class name with the same name. Okay, let me show you this web part in action. This is the remote workbench of SharePoint, and here we have the web part that render on a div with a red background, and this button that contains the hello world text with the background as green. I repeat, no Fluent UI, but it's just a way to create some part of your web part in HTML and then set the style directly without write CSS and or SASS. Of course, we generate a CSS, but by using TypeScript or JavaScript. And this is very interesting because, I repeat, you are able to create styles in a dynamical way. It's very, very important. Let me show you by click on Inspect. You are able to see the name, button, and a suffix with a number that it's automatically managed by the library to avoid again the problem to have some classes with the same name, and then generate a conflict inside your style. So the last part of this session, it's about the Tailwind CSS. And what is the Tailwind CSS? It's an utility-first CSS framework packed with classes that can be composed to build any design directly inside your markup. Tailwind CSS is a complex framework that contains, basically it's implemented in CSS. It contains a very large number of classes. Each class have a specific functionality. For example, change the text color, change the background, change the border, which border, and another, of course, utility. Inside this slide, you are able to see, these snippets of HTML and the animation of what is the result of this HTML. And you are able to see that Tailwind implements some responsive utility to change the layout of your component just by using the CSS class name. It's very, very interesting. Let me show you the website and how to learn this powerful framework. TailwindCSS.com is the website of this framework. Here you are able to see just an introduction of the framework, but if you click on the documentation, you are able to see all the aspects of this powerful framework, from the base style, how to customize this framework, how to manage the layout, how to use the flexbox, how to use grid, box alignment, spacing, sizing, typography, background, borders, effects, tables, transition animation, transform, and more. You are able to see that we have a very large number of utility implemented by using the CSS classes. Let me come back to the home page to make just a quick introduction to this framework again. An API for your design system. So with Tailwind, you are able to recreate, and then I'll show you in the next demo, a complete new design system or mimic an existing design system. Again, we have a lot of utility for change the sizing, for change the colors. We are able to customize all these aspects of the Tailwind CSS, modify and apply the different typography for text, or example, add a shadow for an element, and build whatever you want seriously. Just by implement HTML and use the class name that we have in Tailwind CSS, we are able to change the way to represent our components. Just to change the class name. It's very interesting. One important aspect of the Tailwind is the dimension of the CSS. Of course, if you use the CDN that expone the complete Tailwind CSS framework, the dimension of this framework is very big, because contain all the variation for all the classes that we have for the utility of the Tailwind CSS. But of course, there are the possibility to purge the classes that it's not used inside your code, and then generate a small CSS file that you can link inside your application, SharePoint framework or custom web application. Another thing is the part about the responsive design. You already see in the previous images animation that if you change the dimension of the windows, you are able to change the layout of the component. This is implemented by using the variant of a specific utility. Of course, this way to create a responsive layout, it's already implemented by the Tailwind CSS, but I'll show you later how to make the same for the section inside the SharePoint page, because in SharePoint page we need to make our component responsive, but not regarding the dimension of the page, but the dimension of the section that we have inside the SharePoint page. Later I'll show you. Another things are, for example, the possibility to use the classes for change styles, for focus, active, disable, focus within, focus visible, and the group over, to group to make the over for a group of elements inside inside your markup. Okay. Yeah. Another thing is the possibility. Another important thing is the possibility to extend Tailwind CSS by using the Tailwind config.js. In this way, we can update on a config file. Basically it's a JavaScript file that contains the export for the theme, that contains the font family, the colors, and of course plugins and another thing. In this way, you are able to generate a different version of Tailwind by using your customization. Later in the next demo, I'll show you how to create a plugin and then use inside the Tailwind. Okay, so let's start to another thing it's another important thing, it's that Visual Studio Code have an extension that implements the IntelliSense for Tailwind. This is another incredible things, because it's very simple to add the class name inside your markup, HTML or React, and then have, for example, for the colors, but for all utility of the IntelliSense, it's very, very powerful. Okay. Tailwind CSS core concept. I repeat, this is an utility-first framework, building complex component from a constrained set of primitive utilities. It's a responsive design, using responsive utility variant to build an adaptive user interface. Pseudo-class variant, using utilities to style element on over, focus, and more. And it's configurable. You are able to using JS module to configure all aspects of the framework. Okay, but how to use it inside the SharePoint framework project? We need to implement some steps to add the Tailwind to a SharePoint framework project. First of all, you need to add the package of the Tailwind CSS inside the SharePoint framework project by using npm or yarn. Then you need to install Gulp Post CSS and Gulp Auto Prefixer, because we need these two tools to run the Post CSS inside Gulp and to run Auto Prefixer inside a Gulp. Another thing is to add a simple tailwind.css file inside the source folder. This is necessary to add the custom style, if you need, and add the Tailwind directive to inject the Tailwind base component utility into your CSS. Then you need to create and populate the Tailwind config file, the tailwind.config.js, if you need to customize the Tailwind CSS. The last thing is to create a post build task inside Gulp.js to generate and purge, it's very important, the Tailwind CSS generated file and move it into the lib folder. Because of course we need the small file and the file that contain our customization of Tailwind. This part is regarding the possibility to add the section background behavior inside the Tailwind CSS, inside the SharePoint framework. What is the problem? The problem is, okay, I'm using some Tailwind CSS utility to change the text color, but what's happened if I change the section background inside on a SharePoint page? Of course, the Tailwind CSS contains the static value for colors. And if we change the background section, the colors are changed dynamically. In this way, there are a possibility by using the CSS variable. First of all, we need to extend the Tailwind CSS in the part of the colors that we have inside the theme inside Tailwind CSS configuration file by naming these colors. Okay, you can replace the default colors or add more by extend the configuration, and then using the string as the CSS variable. In this case, I generate my own name for the CSS color variable. The second step is to add the support for the theme variants inside your web part, in the same way that you already see in the previous examples. And then the last part is to handle the theme changed event to dynamically set the CSS variable into the current web part DOM element. Basically, when the user change the section background, we need to call this code to set the property, to use the set property function for the style object of the current DOM element to the color by using the correct CSS variable name, and then set the color that comes from the theme variant. And what about the responsive into the SharePoint page? By using the Tailwind CSS, of course. It's a completely different story. We need to create a plugin to manage the responsive inside a SharePoint page, because the responsive of your web part inside a SharePoint page, it's based on the section and not on the media element of the page. So Tailwind CSS uses media element and it's based on the width of the page, but in this case we need to manage the responsive of your web part by the dimension of the section. To do that, I implement a plugin by using the function that is present inside the Tailwind CSS customization framework, named add variant. In this case, I define some variant by using these names, like for example sp-col-1 for the section that have only the dimension like one column. And then inside this add variant plugin, I use the modify selector to update the class name that will be used with this sp-col-1, for example, to return a new selector that contain a specific prefix by using an already present CSS class name that is defined for each section that we have inside a SharePoint page. We have this selector for the section that have one column. This is for the section that have two columns, and again for 3 columns or different dimension of 2 columns inside the page. Basically, when the Tailwind CSS will be built, we use this plugin to generate our variant for all the selector that we use with this variant. Okay, and now it's the time of the demo. For this demo, I used an already implemented demo for the PNP web part samples repository. Inside this project, we have a web part, Hello Tailwind CSS web part, that contains the same code that we already see in the previous demos regarding the support for the theme variants, and then inside the web part class, the piece of code to retrieve the theme variant and then enable the theme changed event. But in this case, we have to manage for each changed of the section background this piece of code. So we take the style object from the current DOM element of the web part, and then for each color that we want to update or use, of course, we need to set the property, the name of the CSS variable, and then use the color or value that we want to use as a CSS variable. This is for all the colors that we want to use. For example, this is just for colors, but this is the most important part. It's for the semantic colors for the body background, the frame border, the body text, the body divider, the focus border, the warning text, the error text, and this is for all the semantic color that come from the theme variant. Another thing is you need to create the Tailwind CSS to build your custom CSS implementation of the Tailwind. I imported only the components and utilities, and I implemented this set of the same CSS variable to the root object of the page. Because if in some part we are not able to call the code to update the CSS variable, automatically our components take the value directly from the page. The last part is the gulp file.js. This part is very important because it's the part that take the Tailwind CSS package, use the Tailwind CSS, the tailwind.config.js, and tailwind.css that come from the source folder, and then by using the post CSS, generate, purge, and write the result inside the lib folder. If you go here in the lib, you are able to see the Tailwind CSS that contains all the code, all the classes that use inside our markup. But let me show again another thing. This is the tailwind.config.js that contain some code. First of all, contain a part that contain information on how to purge the result CSS, how to extend the current theme by set the colors, and in this case, the name of the colors with the value on using the CSS variable. And another part is how to build the variant for all classes inside the Tailwind CSS. For this part, it's better to go to the documentation of the Tailwind and then understand deeply how to manage this implementation for variant. The last part is our plugin to create the new variant for the SharePoint column, and then take the selector that use this variant and then generate a new CSS class by adding this as a prefix of the generated CSS class name. Now the last part is how to use inside the code. Later I show you the UI, the UI of the web part, but let me show you. This is the main React component. It's contain a stack that contain the document card and the horizontal card. This document card, it's just a component that mimic the UI of the document card of Fluent UI. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I don't need to create the same control that I really have inside the Fluent UI, but this is a way to explain how to use Tailwind CSS to generate the similar UI that we have inside SharePoint or another product. And the second one is the horizontal card. It's a component that takes some information and render a card that it's responsive. Let me show you the horizontal card. And in this way, you are able to see that we use only, so import the Tailwind CSS, and we use the class name as the class name that we have inside the Tailwind. For using the responsive, we are able to see that by using our plugin to add the variant, we are able to apply this variant to this class name or the with class name, but virtually we are able to apply this variant to all the classes that we have inside the Tailwind CSS, because the Tailwind CSS file will be generated at the build time when we build this project. Let me show you the result. And this is the result. This is the document card, and this is the horizontal card. You are able to see that if I change the section background, in this case, these control are able to change the text color or the background color. And then if I try to change the dimension of the section, you're able to see that the responsive for this part is implemented by using again our custom variant for the responsive inside the SharePoint page. Some points to remember about this session. Remember the importance of the consistency of UI. Use a specific graphics toolkit, Fluent UI or Fluent UI Northstar, in order to maintain the consistency and not having to invent any custom styles. Manage the theme changes that may occur in a SharePoint framework web part. Using CSS in JS frameworks for creating dynamic styles. And if you need, create custom styles using an utility frameworks like the Tailwind CSS. In this slide, you are able to see some references like the Fluent UI React website, or the same for the Northstar implementation, the documentation about the context provider themes, the link to get information about the merge styles library, the website of the Tailwind CSS, and the repository that contain the example of how to use the Tailwind CSS inside SharePoint framework. Thank you for watching my session.